Now, as far as running one or multiple scans, again, we're going to look at each one of these approaches in some detail and talk about the pros and cons. When it comes to scans, one of the first obvious questions is which programs to use. Different techs have their different favorites, and unfortunately, I think we're all in agreement there's no one program that will detect everything. So again, it usually ends up being a combination of scans with multiple products. And I've listed these just in alphabetical order. Three of the most common names that I hear: Combo Fix, Malware Bytes, and Super Anti-Spyware. Again, each one has its pros and cons. Each one serves a useful purpose in some cases, but in some cases each one can do damage to or something you want to avoid. Next question is what sequence? Which one is the most likely to find the worst problems first? What options? When do you do a deep scan? When do you do a full scan? What other options? What files do you consider? Which ones do you exclude? There are a lot of options to consider in terms of running these scans. Unfortunately, no matter what program you're using to do a scan with, the newest malware may be smart enough or clever enough not to be detected by that program or by any of them. Also, in some cases, you may not be able to run these programs. Some of the viruses, and especially the rogue security programs, have gotten smart enough that they will block you from being able to run Malware Bytes or whatever program you choose. And again, the time issue. Each scan could run for an hour or longer. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours is not uncommon for some scans, especially on older computers with a lot of stuff on them. So time is an issue, even if it's not time that you're going to have to bill for. It's time that the user is without the use of that computer. The second option, as far as an approach to repairing the damage, would be the reimaging approach. This is what I call the GS approach. Now, the GS is an abbreviation for one of the widely used tech support companies associated with a big box store. So I'll let you fill in the blank there. But the point is, some organizations, that is their blanket approach to fixing any virus or any malware issue, is back up the data and reimage. One of the points here is if that's what you're going to do, the client doesn't really need you. The teenager next door can do that for him, or the big box store, or whoever. So you can tell I'm not a big advocate of the reimaging approach in most cases. It could be appropriate in some situations. If you're talking about an enterprise environment where there are hundreds of computers that are all imaged from the same CD or DVD, and they all have access to the same network files and programs, they don't have any locally installed programs or data, and you can reimage in 15 to 20 minutes, then sure, go for it. But again, that would apply mostly to large enterprise installations. But from a small business or home user standpoint, that's almost never what the user wants. And in fact, it could be catastrophic for those users. We'll get into more details about that in just a minute here. But bottom line is, even if you do it right as completely and think of everything that you can, the computer never looks the same after it's done, and to do it right could take 6 or 8 hours. Now, some of you may have just taken a deep breath when I said 6 or 8 hours. You said, well, I'll do it in an hour or two. Well, maybe, but do you consider all these things? For one, you're going to have to reinstall not just the operating system or something back to what the computer looked like when it first came out of the box, when the last backup was done, but reinstall all the applications. Does the user have all the installation media, all their CDs, all their DVDs? And if they do they have the original sleeves they came in with, all the product keys? What about the stuff they downloaded? Did they just save it or run it when they downloaded it? Was it all in one folder they can get back to? Were you able to back up that folder? There again, what about the product keys, which might have come in a separate email or as part of the confirmation when they did the download originally? Do they have all of that? Then you get into the service packs and the updates. If you're talking about restoring a computer that came with Service Pack 2 of Windows XP, today you have over 300 updates that need to be applied between service packs and different Windows updates, and that can take hours and hours. Then there are all the add-ons: Adobe Reader, Flash, Java, QuickTime, Real Player, and who knows what all other programs like that user might have had on that machine. All the drivers for all the hardware, all the printers, cameras, PDAs, external devices, USB drives, thumb drives, scanners, anything like that, all those drivers. Then the applications have all their default settings: the margins, fonts, colors, printers, orientation, all your file associations, all the file locations. All of that has to be redone. And then there's the desktop. If nothing else, you want to at least have the desktop look the same as it did when they first had the problem. And so that means at least backing up that desktop to a point you can reinstall it or restore it. So as you can see, just going through that whole list could easily take 6 or 8 hours to do a proper job of reimaging and bringing it back to something similar to what the user had before the infection. What I'm going to get into next is the actual methodology that I'm recommending for dealing with these issues. And that methodology is actually different depending on what type of threat you're dealing with. If you are talking about a rogue security program, then the main objective is to get that machine usable again as quickly as possible. The good news is that with most of the rogue security programs, in anywhere from 5 to 10 or 15 minutes, you can get past that and at least have the machine functional. So the user can start working on their applications, get their email, and do what they need to, even while you're completing the repair or the cleanup. But one point of this is that with the rogue security programs, one of the things that I recommend and have put together is specific cleanup procedures for those specific rogue security programs. Again, there may be hundreds of different ones apparently, but when you dig down into it, there are only 6, 8, 10 really different ones. And so part of what I have come up with is a step-by-step procedure for dealing with each one of those rogue security programs. One of the problems in dealing with those is that a lot of them have gotten very effective at defending themselves. They keep you from being able to run Task Manager or getting into regedit. In a lot of cases, you can't access the internet, so you can't download different programs or do Google searches you might need to solve the problem. In a lot of cases, you can't run Windows Explorer. You can't see the files or get into other system tools that you would normally be used to using to solve these problems. But again, following the methodology, within 5, 10, 15 minutes, you can usually get past the rogue security programs. Now, once you've done that, in a lot of cases, those will also infect the computer with more of the traditional type of malware. So once you've cleaned up the rogue security program, gotten the computer functional, then it's time to get into the other methodology that's more specific about dealing with traditional malware. Now, in the overall training program that I'm going to talk to you about in a few minutes here, it goes through the step-by-step procedure, but here is the whole approach. 6 steps to it, and I'll just go through these because it looks really simplistic. The whole effort is in how and the details of getting into each one of these. So find and identify any active viral processes, any process that's running that's associated with the malware that you need to get rid of. Once you've found those, terminate them. The next step is to figure out how they started up in the first place, and it will usually be related to one or multiple registry entries. Get into the registry, remove them, or restore them to their correct values. When necessary, delete or clean the programs that have been infected by the malware. And the final step is to run a deep scan with a trusted scanning program to be sure you've really gotten everything out. Now, in this full day of training, we do go into specific manual procedures to find and eliminate pretty much any malware that's likely to be in there. But realistically, that could involve hundreds of registry entries, hundreds of files. And so manually going through and getting rid of all of that, cleaning it all up, is not a practical approach. So the whole approach here is to clean up enough that you can safely, reliably use the automated tools to get in and do the final cleanup. So that's the whole methodology. Now, going through that, what are the typical results? Here are, again, actual numbers from the people that have been through this training. Well over 90% of the malware is found and removed successfully. And fewer than 10% of those come back. And possibly best of all, the time that it takes from start to finish to do the repairs is usually less than 2 hours. Now, if those sound like pretty outrageous numbers to you, I'll tell you they're very conservative. The actual numbers are close to 100% found and removed, close to 0% that come back, and the actual time is more like an hour and a half on average than 2 hours. But these are results that I think you can pretty well count on as a result of this methodology that we're going to be talking about. So that leads into what you can pay me for. The actual product that I do have for sale, it's what I call the virus remediation training. Now, I'm still looking for a sexier name for it. If anybody comes up with a better idea for something I can call it that rolls off the tongue a little bit easier. But the point is, this describes what it is, what it does. It's 1 day of concentrated hands-on training that's basically made up of 3 pieces: education, tools, and the methodology. As far as the education, it is done in 1 day, presented in 2 major sessions of 2 hours each. We'll get into the agenda for the day in just a second. But the first session is understanding the registry. Now, I need to ask your indulgence here for a second because we're all inflicted with a similar type of handicap, and that is that we're geeks. And a lot of geeks, myself included, tend to think we know it all. So if your first inclination is to say, I already know all about the registry, I'll ask you to maybe put that in the back of your mind for the moment. Because what most people know about the registry, even very experienced geeks and techs that have done a lot of this stuff, is how to go into the registry and find a particular key or subkey and change it or delete it or whatever. And yes, that's obviously important information. But the point is to effectively deal with malware, and especially some of the more sophisticated hiding places that the bad guys have come up with, it really requires a more in-depth understanding of the registry, including things that you probably haven't had occasion to look at or even be aware of in the past. So this whole major session, 2 hours, is devoted just to making sure everybody is up to speed, understanding all these ins and outs of the registry. Here are some of the highlights of what's covered. The structure of the registry, the physical location of it, what it looks like, the hives, keys, and subkeys, different data types that are used, and the significance of those data types. How to edit the registry safely, and different tools that can be used. It's not just regedit. There are times you want to use other tools to edit the registry effectively. Get into the use of control sets, the role they play in the registry, and the users. Certainly talk about registry backup and recovery techniques, and a lot more in all their 24 major topics that are covered about the registry in this session. As far as the tools that come with the training, complete workbooks. We do go into the details of everything we talk about and look at, so you do have a reference you can go back to, you can take your own notes on as we go, and be sure that you have a complete understanding of all the different techniques and the aspects of the registry that we talk about. Another thing that's important to understand here is that when it comes to other tools, some of the tools that worked and were very effective years ago are much less effective today. In fact, in some cases, you just want to quit using them altogether. And the other point of that is that even some good tools are not effective unless you're using them in the proper sequence and with the correct settings. So we'll go into all of those. Along the lines of tools, everybody that participates in the full virus remediation training program does receive a CD that has what I call the virus repair toolkit on it. Now that includes some popular and some little known freeware, programs like Malware and others that we've talked about and that you're aware of. Now, it doesn't include the actual programs themselves. I don't have the authorization to give those programs to you. But the toolkit does include links that you can download your very own copy of the latest version of all of those programs. And I will include the detailed procedures of which ones to use, what sequence, what options, and that sort of thing. In addition to that, possibly the most valuable thing on the Virus Repair Toolkit is some proprietary software that is only available in this format. Programs I have personally written to deal with a lot of these issues. If you can't get into Task Manager, if you can't run any exe file, if you can't run regedit, there are tools on the toolkit to fix all of those issues. Then the methodology itself. This is what we cover in session 2. The afternoon session after lunch gets into more details of what I covered in abbreviated form just a few slides ago, the actual step-by-step procedures to detect the presence of viruses, spyware, other forms of malicious software, figure out how it's loaded, the different hiding places in the registry. One example of that would be the run keys, a common place that malware will start up. There are places that it does that are normal and some that it uses that are not normal if you know what to look for. An example of how this course has been continually updated is dealing with rootkits. Up until about a year ago, these were not a significant factor. Rootkits have been around for a long time, but until fairly recently, they were pretty well dealt with by the traditional antivirus programs. They've gotten much more sophisticated in the last couple of years, especially the last year or so. And so I've included a lot more information about rootkits in the session 2 now than was in there originally. And that's one of the other points. The content is continually evolving. Just as the virus writers come up with new and more sophisticated threats, the defenses and the way we deal with them continues to evolve. So the content is continuously updated. In fact, some of the people that took the course a year or 2 years ago have come back for refreshers and just being sure they're up to date with some of the more recent threats. But back to what's in this session 2, there are actually 21 major topics that are covered, and again, it's all documented in the workbook.